Welcome back to The Last Stop, a series where I tell the tales of the last ever passenger trains of railroads that are either defunct or still active. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at the Flambeau 400, a passenger train that operated from Chicago to Wisconsin towards the Michigan's Upper Peninsula.
Wait, but in the last episode, you said we were gonna discuss the city of San Francisco.
I did, but, well, I was wrong. More on that at the end of the video. Anyway, let's dive right in. In the swinging 1930s, the Chicago and Northwestern was looking strong and was a very well-respected railroad despite the Great Depression still being in full swing. During this time, they were bringing out their own household names like the 400s, which were a series of streamlined premier passenger trains with all sorts of different luxuries, taking patrons from Chicago up to the Twin Cities and beyond. Their most famous, however, was the Twin Cities 400, taking passengers from Chicago to St. Paul, Minnesota, but however that ceased operations by 1963. The 400s took passengers from Chicago to places like St. Paul, Minnesota, Clinton, Iowa, Rapid City, South Dakota, Madison, Wisconsin, and Ishpeming, Michigan. As said, they were streamlined with new flashy equipment. Some such trains were led by their streamlined E-Class Pacific steam locomotives, while others were usually led with conventional diesel like EMD F&E units. Anyway, in 1935, the C&NW began operating a weekend vacation train called the Flambeau, which is French for flaming torch. According to TrainWeb, it initially ran north on Friday and south on Sunday during the summer. Two sections of the train ended at Watersmeet and Ironwood in the Lake District near the Wisconsin border with the upper section of Michigan. Chicago to Green Bay, Wisconsin service was frequent, with northern towns having seasonal service. Service to northern Michigan began weekly on Memorial Day, with daily trains during the high summer. By 1950, the fancy vacationer train joined the famous 400 family, now named the Flambeau 400, providing daily service between Chicago and Ashland, Wisconsin via Green Bay. The train was mostly powered by EMD E units, but sometimes F units made an appearance on the train. It also utilized the new and revolutionary gallery cars by 1958, along with one or two standard coaches. Consists ranged between 2 and 10 cars depending on demand. According to Wikipedia, 2 locomotives usually ran as far as Green Bay, where one would lay over with the dining car for the return trip. Now, let's get into the route. The Flambeau 400 went from Chicago to Ashland, Wisconsin via Green Bay as said earlier, making several stops in between. Beginning at Chicago C&NW Depot, it went north, stopping at Evanston, Waukegan, Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee's Lakefront Station, Port Washington, Sheboygan, Manitowoc, Green Bay, Shawano, Eland, Antigo, Elko, Pelican Lake, Monaco, Three Lakes, Eagle River, Conover, Land O'Lakes, Watersmeet, Rhinelander, Lake Tomahawk, Woodruff, Lac du Flambeau, Mercer, Ironwood, Hurley, Saxon, and finally Ashland C&NW Depot. The total route length was approximately 452 miles, covered in 11 hours. It went northbound as train 153 and south as train 216 with a frequency of once daily. And by the way guys, before we continue, can you please tell me in the comments if I pronounced any station names wrong? Thank you. The equipment on this train was switched and tossed around a lot. For one thing, the new gallery cars weren't operated past Green Bay. In the earlier days, trains going up the branch towards Watersmeet would be pulled by the Class R1 10-wheeler steam locomotives. The train usually ran with 2 locomotives up until Green Bay, and trains up until that point were usually operated with the dining car. Past that, and the dining car was replaced with the lounge car. The 2 units at Green Bay also laid over with the dining car to prepare for the return trip later in the afternoon. In other words, Green Bay was a really major stop on this route, and patrons aboard the train had to do a bunch of waiting if they wanted to continue north. The gallery cars after 1959 were used for the whole route, putting an end to that short-lived operation. Despite all this, it was still perceived as a really efficient operation. Of course, as the story often goes, by the 1960s, American railroads went through major hardships due to the rise of competition with luxury airliners and fancy cars. Most were discontinuing passenger operations completely, with some railroads, like the Chicago Northwestern, doing major cutbacks. By 1963, most of the famous 400s were already gone, but the Flambeau persevered, but not totally unscathed. In the late 1950s, however, the C&NW management envisioned a guillotine as a feature of intercity passenger train service at the Northwestern Terminal in downtown Chicago. By the 60s, the Flambeau 400 operated with only a few bi-level cars and earned most of its money through the movement of mail. The Flambeau 400 service north of Green Bay became seasonal only, summer and the Christmas/New Year period. By May of 68, it was losing thousands of dollars for the Northwestern Railway. A year later, the Flambeau became an unnamed Chicago to Green Bay train with seasonal service to Ashland, despite all the attempts made to keep the train relevant with the new gallery cars. Now, we're in 1971, which, if you're a railroad enthusiast like me, was a huge year for American railroading. On May 1st, Amtrak was inaugurated to take over all long-distance and intercity passenger routes to relieve railroads of their struggling and money-losing passenger operations. While Amtrak didn't take over any specific C&W routes, it did inherit some of the corridors that the C&W trains used to run on. For example, Amtrak's Empire Builder between Chicago and Seattle uses some of the same tracks that the C&W's 400s used to run on. In terms of the Flambeau, well, it wasn't looking bright. Some sources say that the very last day of the train was on January 5th of 71, but others say it ran as an unnamed train until May 1st, which was the day Amtrak took over. At this time, the new Amtrak law was already in effect, prohibiting railroads that had signed on to join Amtrak to discontinue any of their intercity services until April 30th. Nonetheless, this signified a closure to C&W's iconic passenger operations. From what I could find, nobody really tried to essentially bring this specific train back, but portions of the route were still used for commuter service. C&W's North Line provided daily commuter service up to Kenosha, which then became Metro's Union Pacific North Line by the 1980s, which is still operating today. As said earlier, Amtrak still uses a portion of a route formerly used by one of the C&W 400s, but it's not specific which one, but I'm assuming it's the Twin Cities 400, since Amtrak still provides daily vital service to St. Paul from Chicago's Union Station. Today, Chicago, Illinois, and Wisconsin are still served by Amtrak, although almost none of the stations like Green Bay received passenger trains past 1971. However, they did receive plenty of freight service into the 80s. The Chicago Northwestern Station in Chicago was rebuilt and renamed the Ogilvie Transportation Center, currently served by the Union Pacific Northwest and Northwest Metro commuter lines, providing service to Kenosha, McHenry, and Elburn. It is also served by the CTA's green, pink, orange, brown, and purple lines, along with a variety of bus routes. Evanston, Waukegan, and Kenosha, which were stops on the Flambeau 400, are still active today as commuter stations, being served by Metro's Union Pacific North Line, with Kenosha having an additional connection with the Kenosha streetcar. Milwaukee's Union Station, now called Milwaukee Intermodal, is of course still active, with Amtrak's Borealis, Hiawatha, and Empire Builder serving the station, along with an additional connection to the Hop streetcar. Alright, at the beginning of this video, I did say I was going to discuss the city of San Francisco, but I didn't. Why? Well, even if the city of San Francisco's last ever run was in 1972, the Chicago Northwestern, which operated the train jointly with Union Pacific, only ferried the train between Chicago and Omaha, but even then, that operation ended in 1955, and Milwaukee Road took charge until the early 60s, when Southern Pacific took over to jointly operate the train with Union Pacific until 1972. It took me a good while to find the actual last ever passenger train operated by the C&W, because there were a couple with the same discontinuation date, so I just went with the one that sounded the most interesting. Nonetheless, thank you all for watching the second episode of The Last Stop. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can like and subscribe if you want. Anyway, tune in next time when I discuss the lengthy history of the ATSF Super Chief. See you then, and thank you again for watching. Have an awesome day.